1, 2, 3. All right. So I want to, as they get the PowerPoint set up, I want to talk to you guys real quick. As you can see from the slides, Western culture is becoming more secular. By that I mean more people live as if religion is not important now than they did 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so as that takes place, then evangelism and conversations are going to look a little bit different. Even 20 years ago, when I was 18, conversations used to go something like this with people that shared a different worldview. I can remember vividly sitting at a Waffle House, because Waffle House is where it's at, sitting at a Waffle House with a buddy of mine who attended a Baptist church, right? And so the question was not, does God exist? We both presuppose. We both come to the conversation believing that God exists, right? And so the question at hand was not just it wasn't a matter of does God exist? It was, all right, here's this verse, here's this verse. They're the same verse. Who's got the right interpretation of this particular verse? So we go and say, okay, is baptism, required for salvation? All right, I've got Acts 2:38. You've got Acts 2:38. Here's your interpretation. Here's my interpretation. Who's got the right one? Based upon the biblical data, right? Anybody here ever been on a door knocking campaign before? Yeah. Well, I'll say back in the day it was, hey, we're here from the Church of Christ. We're inviting you for this. We're asking for prayers. Hey, is there any way that you'd like to do a Bible study? And a lot of people 30, 40 years ago would be like, hey, yeah, let's do that, right? All right, you got your verse. I've got my verse. All right, what's the Bible say? You've got this belief. I've got this belief. What's the Bible say? Right? Not so much anymore with that. Nowadays, if you went on a door knocking campaign and said, hey, we're from the Church of Christ, we're inviting you to this gospel meeting, people would just be like, man, get out of my face. Because we are less communal now than we used to be. People are very private. But with the secularization of culture, it's okay to do a door knocking campaign if you do and ask the right question. All right? So now you walk up to somebody, or you have a stranger or someone that you may know, or a kid that's a friend of your kid, and you say, hey, what do you think about what Jesus says right here in John 3:16? The answer will not necessarily be, oh yeah, I believe that. The answer is probably going to be more like, well, how do you know that what was written then is what you have now? Or how do you even know that Jesus existed? Or how do you even know that God exists? Right? So maybe that's the question I want to ask you to open up before we get into this session. If I were somebody who is not a Christian, and I came to you and I asked you a question, I said, how do you know that God exists? What would your answer be? What would you say? Or if I asked you the question, maybe that's the first question. The second question is, why are you a Christian? What would your answer be? Let's talk about the first one. If I was not a Christian, I came to you, say I was one of those agnostics, atheists, or nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And I came to you and said, why do you believe God exists? What would you say? Okay. All right. So some reference point to creation. All right, what else? I'd say watermelon Red Bull. No, just kidding. No. What would you say? This is the participatory part of the session. What would you say? Some point of creation. What else? Okay. So fulfilled prophecy, scientific foreknowledge of the Bible. All right. What else? Nothing else? Okay. All right. So, all right. So notice you pointed to some piece of creation. All right. What if I came back to you and said, how do you know that those things were created by God? Well, I understand that, and that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah,
Right?
I would have to be, and what I'm finding out now is every time I hear something from science or something, all it does is reconfirm,
Sure.
you can go to Scripture, especially the Old Testament, and pull out facts from today where it proves it,
Sure.
calling it out, and it doesn't. Then I go straight to what Genesis says about my creation.
Right.
Who did it and all that, just because my faith is already there.
Right.
But I'm sitting on my hands waiting, anticipating on how to share that with someone.
Right.
Maybe the Bible.
Right. So, and that's exactly where I was going, is if we were to press that conversation more and you were to say, hey, like Genesis chapter 1 and 2, well, the person that's an agnostic, the person that's an atheist, the person that's the none is going to say, well, that's great for you, but I don't believe that. I'm skeptical of that. And so then the question is, after that comment, where do we go? And often the answer is, I don't know. I don't know where to go. If I were to ask you, why are you a Christian, what would you say? Why are you individually a Christian? Because of what? Okay, because of what Jesus did for us. All right, what else? We don't know why we're Christians? Do what? Okay. All right. Go ahead. No, you're fine. I don't care.
I think one of the singular events that's so much evidence was the resurrection of Jesus. And I think when God raised Jesus from the dead, provides so much evidence for that. That validated all of the claims that Jesus made about being the way, the truth, and the life.
And where's that evidence located?
Where?
Yeah, where's the evidence for the resurrection located? Where's it at? Where do you primarily get the evidence for the resurrection?
Oh yeah. So you got the eyewitness accounts, you obviously have their death, dying believing what they saw, real places, like the tomb of Joseph, Arimathea, those types of things.
What historical documents do I have for those things? Would be the question that the skeptic might ask.
You have the gospel accounts, obviously. You look at them like this as, we look at them as Bible books, but you look at them as just eyewitness testimonies, which is how they're written to be. And you see those as individual eyewitness accounts. But also you have, like Josephus talks about it too, and he's not even a Christian. So you have different, secular accounts.
So where the atheist is going to poke and prod coal, he's going to look at coal and say, so your evidence for your Christianity is located in the book that's for Christianity. That's where he's going to poke and prod. It's like, okay, well, how do I know? Right? So here's the point. Hold on one second. Here's the point that I make. Oftentimes, the answers that we give when we say, why do you believe that God exists? Very similar to what you've said. Oftentimes when people ask, well, why are you a Christian? I say, well, that's the way I grew up. I read it in the Bible. I had an experience, like summer camp or something like that. Right? Nothing wrong with those answers. Not bad answers. All right, those are good answers for individuals. But for the skeptic, the agnostic, the nones, right? They're going to say, so, you had an experience and you felt the presence of God and that your heart was turned in that moment. Well, what would you say to the Mormon that says that? Or what would you say if I were a Muslim and I said that? Or what would you say if I was a Buddhist and said that? Or if I was Hindu and said that? Right? I'm a Hindu because I had an experience. I'm a Hindu because I grew up that way. I'm a Hindu because I read it in my holy text. See the problem? You've got the Mormon that says the same thing as the Christian, the Hindu that says the same thing as the Christian, the Muslim that says the same thing as the Christian that says the same thing as the Christian. All because I grew up that way, I had an experience, I read it in my book. See the problem? Not that those are bad answers. Don't get me wrong. I do believe that you can be converted to Christianity by reading the Gospels and by reading Acts and the epistles. I do believe that. All right? I've known people that have come to faith that way. But as far as giving reasons as to why someone else should be a Christian, right? I can't just rely on, well, it's right there in the Bible. What if they don't believe it? What if they're not familiar with it? And then this is where we get off on our conversations. We then, when people press us about, well, I'll use your example if that's okay, say, well, hey, you've read Genesis chapter 1. That's great, but I don't believe that. And then someone says, well, sometimes we get offended by that, and we'll say something like, well, if you would just read your Bible, you'd be a Christian. Well, you think they're coming back for a Bible study? You think they're coming back for another conversation? No, absolutely not. All right, one of the worst experiences I ever had is we were doing a mission trip out to Utah, to LA, Utah, and we set up a study with 2 members of the Church of Christ Latter-day Saints, Mormons. 7 of us, 2 of them, and we hammered them for an hour and a half. There was no, we were not being cordial. It was just one person after another, just boom, 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 boom. And then we had the gall at the end of that conversation to ask, when would you guys like to meet again? And they said, we're not. Because 7 of us just went for the jugular, because it's like, Mormons, let's get them, right? And it failed miserably. One of the worst experiences we've ever had, or I've ever had in a Bible study. Because there's just 7 of us on 2. They felt ambushed. Right? And what the censure was, well, if you would just read the correct Bible, you'd understand. To somebody who believes that they have the correct Bible. Impasse, friction. All right? So what do we do with God's existence if there are people who maybe aren't familiar with Christianity, who maybe are in the situation that I don't know anything about Genesis, or I don't believe that's true. Oftentimes we get stuck. So here's one of my favorite arguments, reasonings for the existence of God. We've already seen some of this. All right. So 2 things we're going to look at this afternoon. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument and the moral argument. So, cosmological arguments are just arguments for the existence of God based upon the origin of the universe. All right? Now, what is good about both of these arguments? It's called natural theology. All right? I take the evidence that I see in nature, very similar to what you're talking about. The evidence that I see in nature, and I reason from nature that God exists. Now, what's good about that is for the skeptic, the agnostic, the person who's in the nones category, right, is I don't have to flip to any verse in the Bible. Now, these arguments are for general theism. What I mean by that is we're simply trying to move the person that's in that category of skeptic, agnostic, nones. We just want to put a pebble in their shoe. Everybody ever heard of that before? Anybody ever walked with a rock in their shoe? How comfortable is that? That's annoying, right? So all we want to do is we simply want to place a pebble and let it sit there, right? We want to place a pebble, let it sit there. We're not seeking to convert somebody with one of these arguments. We're simply trying to say, like with Braden, the student that was a pretty hardcore atheist, I just want Braden to think. I just want him to consider, right? It's not, if you don't believe the Kalam after we've done this, the conversation has failed. No, that's not what we're looking at all. So it's very simple. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Very simple, easy to remember. All right? And so what we want to do, so this is what we call a deductive argument. All right? So if the first line of reasoning is true and the second line of reasoning is true, then the third line of reasoning, as one professor of mine would say, is unget-aroundable. Right? See, preachers can make up words. It's okay. Right? It's unget-aroundable. If 1 is 2 and 2 is true, or if 1 is true and 2 is true, then 3 necessarily follows. It is sound, which means you cannot escape it, whether you like it or not, or don't like it or not. It just be the way it be. All right, so what we have to do then is we have to go through each line and defend each line. So whatever begins to exist has a cause, right? Defense of premise 1, something cannot come from nothing, right? Anybody ever seen that? Something come from nothing? I've never seen something come from nothing. Like when we look at the way things come into being, there's always a cause of something that comes into being, something that exists. So for instance, everybody in here, you did not spring out of nothing from the ether, right? You are the product of your parents. Whether you like that or don't like that, you just are. All right? So something cannot come into being uncaused from nothing. Nothing by itself is a universal negative. No thing. So here's the question we want to ask is how can no thing produce something? Make sense? Tracking? How can something come from no thing? And so this is the question that we want to ask our inquisitive friends. If the universe can come into existence from nothing, then why doesn't anything and everything come into existence from nothing? Why don't we just see like Bengal tigers just popping into existence? Or like $1 million popping into existence into my bank account? That'd be really nice, wouldn't it? Like if that were the case. Or like right now, what if like just a Xbox 360 or a PlayStation 5 just generated itself from nothing, right? Our everyday experience shows us that things that begin to exist have a cause, right? If we walked into this auditorium, right, and you walked into it by yourself, and you just looked at all of these pews, you would look at all these pews and you would say, they just got here by themselves. They just sprung into existence from nothing. No. These pews, regardless of whether we know who designed them and crafted them, we know that they did not come from nothing. Something, someone, caused these pews to exist. And so our everyday experience and scientific data show that premise 1 is true, that whatever begins to exist has a cause. We see that consistently every day. Even if we don't know, or even if we can't recognize who the cause is, we know that pews just don't come into being out of nothing. Now think about that for a second. How would you live consistently if things like Bengal tigers just came into being from nothing? Like you'd probably never leave your house. Well, what if I leave my house and all of a sudden like an elephant springs into existence out of nothing and crushes me? Like how would you live consistently? So, premise 1 seems to be true. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. So there's 3 areas that we want to look at as far as the beginning of the universe. One would be the expansion of the universe. So way back in the beginning of the 1900s, this guy, anybody here know of Albert Einstein? If you don't know of Albert Einstein, let's talk afterwards. All right. We'll talk about which rock you lived under, when you were growing up. So Einstein, creates his or develops his theory of relativity and predicts a static universe. All right. Well, the problem with that is that it was wrong. That part of it was wrong. He predicted a static universe, and then these guys come along, Alexander Friedman and George Lemaitre. They come along and they take Einstein's theory, and Einstein did the cardinal sin in math. He divided by 0 to get a static universe. All right, and so what these guys did is they took his theory, they removed what we call the fudge factor. All right, and they predicted an expanding universe. All right. Now, why is that important? All right, that's important. Say I had a balloon. I should have brought a balloon. Or that Spider-Man thing that you had earlier, right? And I put little permanent ink dots on that balloon, right? As I put air into the balloon, what happens to the dots? They grow apart, right? As the balloon expands, the dots go further and further away, all right? And then what happens if I let the air out of the balloon? What happens with the dots? They come together. So the expansion of the universe shows that at one point in time, all of these planets and all of these galaxies that are now spread apart were at one point not there. So it shows an expansion of the universe, which shows that the universe and time had a beginning. Which brings us to our next point, which is second law of thermodynamics, which basically just says the universe is running out of energy. All right? Think about your car. You put gas in it, right? I mean, unless you drive an EV, okay? You put gas in it, you charge it up. One of those two. I got to say that now. That's another subject for another time. All right, you put gas in it, and let's say your gas tank can hold you for 500 miles. At 510 miles, what happens? Why? You got no more fuel. There's no energy source to keep the car going, right? So you have to have more energy. So think of the universe as one big gas tank, right? Or one big EV, right? You've charged it up, and it's running. As long as it's running, it's using energy. And then it says at some point that energy is going to run out. That car is going to stop. The battery will cease. That's what scientists say about the universe. Now, here's my question. If the universe has been around for forever, then why hasn't the gas tank been on empty? Why hasn't the battery ceased? Everybody tracking with that? Because if the universe has been around for forever, then we should have already run out of energy in the universe. But we haven't, which shows that the universe is finite in time. There's a beginning of the universe. And then recently, there's the Borg-Guth, the Lincoln theorem, that said any universe that's been expanding throughout its age must have a beginning. Like it's a proven fact. All right. So premise one, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Right? Premise two, it's clear from these three things that the universe began to exist. And so then we come to, therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, the question we want to ask is, what's the best explanation for a cause? The universe can't cause itself just like you can't cause yourself. Right? So the universe is made up of time, space, and matter. Right? So whatever made the universe has to be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And it has to be powerful. And I would say it has to be personal. It has to be personal because there are only two types of general causes. Scientific causes and personal causes. All right? Well, if the universe began to exist, and in the universe, with the beginning of the universe, are these scientific laws, like the law of gravity, the law of thermodynamics. Prior to that, they don't exist. So there's nothing to start a universe, jumpstart a universe. There's nothing to start the car, essentially. Right? Cars don't start on their own, right? The only way a car starts is what? A person. why that question caused you? It's apples and oranges, right? Because the color green is one category, taste is another category. I try to take something from the category of color and move it into the category of taste, which makes it incoherent. Like if someone ever said, man, green tastes good, and they're serious. Go ahead. Sure. Right. Yeah. So this is probably a question you're going to get either after you ask the question, like, do you believe that stuff just comes into existence from nothing? And I think the easiest answer when they say, well, who caused God? It's okay for you to say, by definition, God's not caused. And so talking about, I see your question, but God never began to exist. Yeah, and you just establish that when you first have that conversation, they say, hey, do you believe that God exists? What do you mean by God? What's their definition of God? If we're talking like Mount Olympus, I don't believe that. If we're talking, Norse gods, Thor and Odin, I don't believe that. I believe in the Christian God, and the definition of the Christian God is this. Can we start the conversation from that? Yeah, we can start the conversation from that. All right, cool. Well, do you believe something can come into being from nothing? Well, no, I don't. But who caused God? Well, remember, when we first started the conversation, I said that I believe that God is timeless. He's all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and it has existed eternally. So by that definition, he's not caused to exist. And you're trying to say that he is. And so that's a category error. Make sense? Yeah. So, when we get to this particular answer, what we have at our disposal, very simply, is something can't come into existence from nothing. Here's my definition of God. Based upon what we have, observable facts about the universe is expanding. It's running out of energy. And that scientists say, like, hey, any universe that's been expanding must have a beginning. So as a skeptic, as a agnostic, as a none, right, what's your best explanation for the origin of the universe? It can't be the universe itself, because things don't create themselves, right? Well, it can't be nothing, because you can't get something out of nothing. And so based upon the features of the universe, time, space, and matter, the only thing that create time, space, and matter is something that's timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And even right there, I would just say, that sounds like God. Right? Any questions about this? Yeah, go ahead. Right. Yeah. So, one second. I gotta get the good stuff. So here's the thing: a lot of, and I'll say this, and I may get tarred and feathered over this one, and that's okay. Remember, our goal from the first session is to meet people where they are, not where we are. So even if I don't, like for me, like with Braden asked me, he goes, what do you think about the Big Bang? And that's like taboo for some reason in like the church. We can't say it, or else like Voldemort shows up or something. For me, I grant them it. So you believe in the Big Bang? Sure, take it. Because even the Big Bang says that there was at one point no universe, and now there is a universe. So if they want to go and say, well, I believe in the Big Bang. I'm like, thank you. The only difference between me and you is I know who banged the universe into existence. There you go. And so I actually, now think about this for a second. If I'm trying to get somebody from non-belief to, or help them from non-belief to becoming a disciple of Jesus, what I want to do is I want to make the bar as low as possible without being a heretic. Right? I want to make the bar low as possible without being a heretic. And so if they say, well, I believe in the Big Bang, and then we get off into like this debate about the Big Bang versus six-day creation, I've kicked that ball 50 yards right of the goalpost. We can have that conversation. But let's have that conversation when we're both brothers. When she's a sister in Christ and I'm a brother in Christ, and we can have that conversation. So if they bring up Big Bang, I say, okay, cool. So you believe, these particular points in verse 2, or not verse 2, in point 2, about the origin of the universe. The universe had a cause. You believe that. All right, cool. All right, well, now let's move to point 3. Right? So if someone brings up the Big Bang, I'm not going to get off into a big debate about 6-day creation versus billion-year creation. I'm just be like, cool. You believe that? There's a point of origin. Let's talk about it. Make sense? So Braden actually brought that to me, and I was like, cool, we agree. At one point in time, there wasn't a universe, and now there is. Let's talk about it. So I think I don't shy away from that. I actually embrace it, right? Very similar, and I'll go off on a tangent for a quick second. Very similar to when people want to bring up early sources for the New Testament, and they bring up Q. I don't know if y'all have heard about that or not. The Q document that nobody really knows whether it exists or not. But if someone says, hey, Mark copied from an earlier source, I'm like, cool, that's one more source for Christianity. Outstanding. So you agree there's an earlier source than Mark for the veracity of what Jesus said and did. All right, I agree with you. That doesn't take away from the historical claim. It just adds to it. Even though I might disagree with it, I'm going to give them that in our conversation because that's where they are, right? And plus, it just makes my job easier of, okay, well, now there's another early source for Christianity, right? So I do the same thing very similar with this. If someone wants to bring in the Big Bang, I'm not going to make a big, no pun intended, I'm not going to make a big deal about that. I'm going to grant them that, and we're going to talk about it. So, yeah. So, good question. What else? So, yeah, you talk with somebody that's a skeptic, agnostic, one of the nuns. Just say, hey, you believe stuff can come into existence from nothing? Well, no. Okay, well, then why would you believe that the universe came into being from nothing? Well, I don't know why I would believe that. Okay, cool. Well, what if, the universe is not from nothing, but it's not a nothing. It's not a what. It's a person, right? It's a very good segue to that. And they can even say, well, you're just going off of Genesis. And whoa. I didn't bring in Genesis. Right? I didn't bring in Genesis 1 or 2. I'm just asking the question. Remember, this is for general theism. We don't get to Christianity until we start talking about resurrection. All right. Questions, comments, insults? I'll take any of those. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, think about this for a second. And this is a question that I've asked, and I'm on video, and I don't really care. It's fine. This is a question, and I'm going to refer to Braden, because Braden is a great example. Braden asked me, you think the earth is young or old? And I said, who cares if Jesus didn't rise from the grave? Who cares? If Jesus didn't rise from the grave, it doesn't matter. Right? And he's like, you keep saying that. I'm like, yeah, because that's the main point. And so I think that that's a fair question, regardless of whether I believe in old earth creation or young earth creation. If I'm talking to a skeptic, if I'm talking to an agnostic, if I'm talking to a nun, N-O-N-E-S, not the Catholics, right? And they say, this, my first comment is, okay, if the universe is old and Jesus didn't rise from the grave, is Christianity true? Well, no, it's not. Okay, well, if the universe is old and Jesus did rise from the grave, is Christianity true? Well, yeah. Okay, well, if the universe is not young and Jesus rose from the grave, is Christianity true? Yeah. Okay, well, if the universe is not young or he is young and Jesus rose from the grave, is Christianity true? Yeah. I did that with Braden. He goes, you keep coming back to if Jesus rose from the grave. I'm like, exactly. That is the point, right? And we can, once again, we can have the conversation about young earth, old earth, but let's do it as brothers in Christ rather than as a Christian and as someone who's seeking, all right? Because those things can create roadblocks, unnecessary roadblocks in the path of making or helping somebody see the truth of Christianity. Jesus doesn't say, those who believe and baptize and believe in an old earth will be saved. Does he? No. Acts 2:38 says nothing about creation. Right? It doesn't say that. So why would I add a requirement for salvation that neither Jesus nor his apostles added for a requirement for salvation? I mean, listen, in the world that we live in, you guys saw the stats, in the world that we live in, just getting somebody to have a conversation about Jesus is hard enough. Right? So then why would I go off on a tangent about something that's just maybe going to cause more confusion than if I just say, I'm just trying to get you to believe that God exists, right? And then let's talk about Jesus. So, good point. Anything else for this session? Yeah. So, right. So that's a good question. Let's handle that in the Q&A, because I still need to get to the moral argument. All right, it's a good question, great question. So, what do you want to do? You just want to roll into it? Anybody need to go potty? That'll be on the recording for y'all's laughter. Okay, well then go. That's fine. No, you're fine. 5 minutes and we'll come back. So. Oh, is it? Okay. No, well then let's go to lunch, dude. I'm down to clown. So let's do it.